Yeah, you're welcome to this series of lectures on creative writing once again. And today we are continuing with how we started with, the prose narrative. We want to emphasize the fact that prose fiction is a very nuanced form of writing, and that is even peculiar to all forms of imaginative injections into prose. Now, if we want to go into the world of storytelling, we can't predict how the story will be told. We can't tell how far it can go. We can't always imagine the extent of, the descriptiveness, the narration, the dialogue, and the like, because stories don't normally go in a particular definitive manner. It comes from perspectives. They come from several ways of seeing things. We might want to say the same thing. We might just find out that we are talking about the same subject matter in so many ways. Okay, so those perspectives undergird the fact that we can't always set a format of telling stories, but we can try to tell us how to make our story very, very sustainable, our story very, very right-directing, our story is very, very compelling, in such a way that we gain readership, followership, and hopefully these stories will be instant page turners. Now, I want to suggest some things I've found out about very successful narratives. Number one, the idea of the fact that the storyteller must be able to convince the audience is very key, is very primary. And therefore, the way to do that, we've talked about it, not quite expansively the last time we spoke, but then we just touched it, but we tried to do a little bit of expansion on that about our facility with language, our connection with language and how to go about doing that. Now, you are narrating. In other words, you are telling a story, whether it's autobiographical or biographical, fictional, however you look at it. What do we see in going on that story? Now, the last time we were together, we attempted an introduction. But that introduction definitely starts the flow into the body of the story. That is, the story itself, the world of that story itself. How do we get there? I would suggest that number one, we should know that the first thing to actually master is our way to achieve what I would call linguistic flow. Linguistic flow, which will encompass the narrative. The linguistic flow will have to do with the nitty-gritties of grammar to start with. The nitty-gritties of grammar, the way you are able to develop, the sentence structures, your word structures, your phrasal structures, your clausal structures, in such ways that are very, very collocative, and such ways that can tell us that there is a correspondence, there is a sequence of what you are saying in a very smooth manner. You want to tell us something that ends at a particular an arrival point. You are going to be able to make us come along with you. It's not just talking, okay? It's about taking us along with you. How do you do that? When you are on a journey, you really can't tell what will be happening, even on a familiar road. You really can't tell how it's going to go. And you really can't tell how the motorist, or the driver is going to speed or is going to maintain a particular movement in such a way that you will enjoy that journey. But you can devise yours in too many ways. At times, when your driver is, let's assume you are not the one driving, when your driver is taking you on a journey in a motor car, you discover that the driver may want to get there on time and is on a very fast pace. The driver may be very leisurely and, allow the people to actually relax. The person that wants to take a nap, in the course of the journey will be able to do that. And then there is nothing really, shocking or terrifying as the vehicle goes on. And at times, if the road is bumpy, you pass on the road before it was smooth, it's bumpy. I don't think the driver will be jacking up, just going on like that, running. The driver wants to be very careful the way they navigate that road. Let's assume that your story is a difficult one, like that bumpy road. It intersects a number of things. It intersects discourses that have to do with culture, cultural clashes. It has to do with themes that intersect terrorism, for instance, kidnapping, that have to do with, a number of things. And migration is also involved. Then you are trying to look at life sequences and life livability, so to speak, that intersect child life, that has to do with gender, that has to do with things that intersect the history of the locale you are dealing with. How do you go about that? I will suggest this kind of things. Number one, you've got to master the way to describe your story. You are going on a bumpy road. You are likely to want to tell us particular points of interest in the story, particular areas of concern that will actually take us along that story. Maybe some things that happened in the past that have some influences on the present, and then we want to talk about some expectations that are in the mind of the person that is the protagonist and how difficult it's likely to come about. Let's say, for example, protagonist is hoping to get to a particular setting that he had not been to, but he had heard so many scary tales about. Perhaps on the road, you have very violent tribes that are not friendly with visitors. But right where this person is going to, there are a lot of archival materials. The person must unearth, maybe archaeological thing, the person must unearth for a particular project that will be very influential, very crucial for national development, or for a particular family's, visibility in national history, which perhaps had been silenced in the course of narrating, the whole landscape of the history of that place. How do you go about it? You've got to master the art of description. And when we talk about description, you've got to know that there is no hard and fast rule about this, but you've got to know that the language of imagery, the language of metaphorization, the ways in which you can suspend people into seeing things unfold before them must be arranged through sentences, through words. You might have to be idyllic, so to speak. In other words, you go from the visible to the surreal. We are moving from the realistic to a dream world of description that interestingly collocates with the realities we are talking about. I must tell us this, that in the current world of creative writing, I really suspect that emetic, distinctions of prose, fiction, drama, when we are talking about genres. Look, that might be a format, and it has often been. But when we are talking about language use, there are times when in prose fiction, what will sustain the tempo of description is poetic language. At times, to describe how somebody is, that is, perhaps you want to describe a situation of trauma, a real world happening within the mind of somebody that is very hard to describe. And you want to enact that. You want to talk about how, meshed up an incident of maybe kidnap as perhaps forever killed the life of somebody who has an aspiration. For example, what if you are writing a story, and I'm saying God forbid here, what if you are writing a story of a particular woman who didn't have it easy all throughout life, but somehow succeeded at the end of the day, becomes successful in middle age, and then she has an only daughter and an only son. Somehow, the husband left home. He just left the house and is nowhere to be found. The record of that person is such that it's better not to be imagined. Now, the woman has done the best to take a daughter and a son to the point where they have graduated. This daughter is about getting married. She has done all her best to train them. And just on the day of the wedding, everybody is in church and they're expecting the bride to come very gallantly into the space where the wedding is going to happen. And then a phone call rings to the horror of everybody. And the call is going to the very mother, who has somebody representing the father to usher in the bride, to the point where the solemnization of wedding will come up. And all of a sudden, while the woman is expectant and gay about the ceremony, happy and also secretly shedding some tears, and then, looking at the moment of her joy, coming up very soon as the bride comes in, who is her daughter, all of a sudden, her thoughts of joy gets punctuated by a phone call. No name, just numbers, and then she picks the call. Madam, are you so and so? Yes, please, what's happening? So and so. I said, I'm sorry, are you the mother of, let's say her name is Abigail? Of course, when you ask such a question from a mother who is about giving a daughter for wedding, do you think she will be sitting alright? Yes, what's the matter? Who is this? And the person says, I'm sorry, I have bad news for you. Your daughter just got kidnapped. What do you think the storyline will be right from that point? You have got to navigate that point. Is she going to collapse? What's going to happen at the spot where the wedding is supposed to take place? What do you think the scenario will be like? I mean, how do you navigate that space? And then you are going to the point where, and interestingly, that kind of scene is happening maybe the second or third chapter of a novel that is going towards 20 chapters that you are writing. How do you go through the next 20 chapters in a narrative that is already complex from the beginning? You have a lot of work to do. Your descriptive power will be at play. Your realm of imagination for suspense, for surprise, for shock, for the dramatic will be at play. It's a bumpy road of novel writing you are bringing in, but also know that levels of conflict will also spring up new things that will be happening. Definitely new things that warrant imagining, some events that just come as shocks, as surprises, and then some things should be lining up with another. Some unexpected events might occur with something that happened that might be a kind of detective lead to how these conflicts and levels of conflict will have to be resolved. And then you might also be very experimental to bring in moments of digression that might be going through the realms of flashbacks, foreshadowing. Your plot structure might even be chosen to be inorganic. In other words, you are not really narrating something on a chronological plane anymore. There is a kind of cinematic effect that has to come into the storyline, and perhaps another story, paralleling what you are writing on. And then somehow, as you go on, a number of things will be getting revealed and getting revealed and getting revealed. And then while you write, you are still sustaining a particular focus of that story. But then you are also dealing with community. You are dealing with universality. You are dealing with several cultures. You are dealing with several geographies, several environments, several settings at the end of the day, and so on and so forth. And then as you go on, remember, characters will be developed. And as you develop these characters, they've got to be very, very persuasive. You want to develop characters that probably, protagonist and help, so to speak, the kind of characters that are very helpful to the way the plot goes on. Maybe characters that will aid the investigation. And you're also bringing in characters that are villainous. Remember that somebody called that woman, and I don't think the tone of the call expressed shock or expressed a regret. That call probably came from one of the kidnappers, and the relaxed mood of the call might be suggesting that somebody that knows these people very intimately is the one giving the piece of news, but they don't really know this person. How do you navigate that space? Now, remember, it's not likely a very convincing plot will happen if this person is just imagining completely a story without ever having read stories along that line. Maybe detective stories, stories of sudden suspense, stories that can be very surreal, perhaps stories that go into the complex situations of not just crime stories, but going into the noir story, okay? Going into the stories of the urban space that is very, very congested and very tension-filled. That person definitely dealing with that sort of thing must have understudied other people that had navigated such bumpy storylines so that he or she is confident to use linguistic realism, linguistic flow, characterization, dialogue in such ways that will be very, very coherent, that will make the page absolutely turning and moving on in a very, very coherent manner. Some of the fantastic novels I've ever read that are within this kind of gloomy scenario include Yasmina Khadra's The African Equation. That novel is a novel that at a point when I was reading it, this was the sickest novel I ever read. It felt so sick and sickening. It had to do with kidnap, and at a point, even though it was a page turner, but because of so many griefs I had in reading that story and the way in which it was very impossible to drop that storyline, I was hoping to finish reading that story very soon. And somehow within myself, I was saying, I'm not going to attempt reading this kind of story again because it is another world of experience on its own. But that is the hallmark of the writer, okay? But if I want to do something critical on stories that are very riveting, that deal with kidnap and international politics, that deal with, transcultural negotiations, that deal with racial politics and all that, of course, that's going to be one of my best bets. But now, I know I'm not reading it for anything pleasure. I'm reading it for discourse. Okay? So, Yasmina Khadra's African Equation. Have you ever read Sir Rider Haggard's He? Or have you ever read The Return of Ayesha? When you want to be suspended into a world that you have never seen before, like the kind of thing I'm just trying to bring about here, try to read one of these novels or both of them and several others like that you wonder whether the novelist really existed. That is this story a creation of a human being, or is it just like that? It's like you can't imagine that people could extend their mental realms to such capacities to get a very realistic picture of an event that is suspended in gloom and, the subterranean, and yet things come out of it after a long, bumpy road of journey. Wonderful creativity. So we are talking about the expertise of language here, of descriptive power, of narrative eloquence, of linguistic realism. For instance, when dialogues happen between classes of people, one highly educated, the other one not so educated, and you are using the English language, for example, are you going to write in the civilized, educated language of the person who is very well educated in the way the person that is not very educated will be speaking? Obviously, no. You are going to have to give us a linguistic realism of the class, of the culture, of the exposure of that person that will also be able to relate with the communicative reception of the person talking. Maybe what you could arrive at that point is pidginization or the nativization of the English language to enact the local flavor of the environment you are dealing with. And you've got to do that with some nuance. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in the next lecture to round off this exposure on writing the prose narrative. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel, you like it, and you share it. Thank you very much.